Everyone knows this story. A small boy, a sling, a giant, a stone that changed history. We've told it at Sunday school. We've quoted it in speeches. We've printed it on posters. But the boy we picture may not be who we think he is. Before David ever faced Goliath, someone who knew him gave a very specific description of who he was. And that detail sits quietly in the text, almost hiding in plain sight. And when we go back to the original Hebrew words, the picture begins to shift. It doesn't change the ending, it changes the person standing inside it. And that matters more than most people realize. Because sometimes the entire weight of a story depends on who you think is standing in the center of it. We stay inside the text tonight. Every claim comes directly from Scripture and the meaning of its original language. And when we slow down enough to actually listen to those words, something subtle starts to happen. The story stops feeling like a simple children's tale and starts feeling like a layered historical moment. By the end, this familiar story will not feel familiar anymore. David was the youngest of 8 sons. Samuel came to anoint him while he was watching the family sheep. That detail alone already sets a contrast in motion. The youngest, the overlooked one, the one outside the center of attention in a culture where birth order often shaped identity. The overlooked one, the forgotten one in human terms, even if not in divine terms. Then came Goliath. Saul's armor didn't fit David. He picked 5 smooth stones from a stream and stepped toward a professional soldier trained for war. And that image has carried itself across centuries. It has become almost iconic in how we imagine courage. It's a powerful image. Humble beginnings, unexpected victory. But the Hebrew text adds weight that often gets missed in casual retellings. And that weight changes how we understand what is actually unfolding. Because before the battle ever begins, there is already language being used to describe David that does not match the simplified image of a fragile child. Before the battle, Saul's servant describes David like this: "I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, skillful in playing, a mighty man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and the Lord is with him." And those words are doing more work than most readers realize. Mighty man of valor, man of war. Those are not casual compliments. Those are structured descriptions with social and military weight behind them. In Hebrew, the phrase gibbor chayil carries a very specific resonance. It refers to strength, capability, and proven capacity under pressure. Not theoretical strength, not imagined bravery, but tested reliability in real conditions. And that is how someone who personally knew David describes him before Goliath ever steps forward. That raises a difficult question. How does a shepherd boy carry a title like that? And more importantly, why does the text allow that tension to remain unresolved in a simple way? The word most English translations render as boy or youth is the Hebrew na'ar. And this is where things begin to shift. Because na'ar is not a fixed category in Hebrew usage. It stretches depending on context. It appears in more than 200 places across the Hebrew Bible, and it does not always describe a child in the modern sense. In many cases, it simply means a young person. But Hebrew meaning is never flat or mechanical. It bends with environment, role, and responsibility. Context becomes everything. In military or structured service contexts, na'ar can describe someone attached to leadership, someone in training, someone carrying responsibility in proximity to authority. Not a child playing in a field, but a young man positioned inside a system of preparation. Some scholars, including John MacDonald in his linguistic studies, have suggested that in certain contexts, the closest English equivalent might be squire, and that word matters, because a squire is not defined by innocence or isolation. A squire is defined by proximity to training, armor, and responsibility. That is not a farm category. That is a structured role. And David is immediately placed into structured environments in the narrative. After Saul hears the servant's description, he brings David in and appoints him as armor-bearer. That is not symbolic language. That is functional assignment inside a royal military system. An armor-bearer stands beside a king in volatile conditions. He carries weapons. He operates in proximity to danger. He is trusted under pressure where hesitation can cost lives. It is a position of proximity and trust at the same time, and David receives it immediately. Someone might object here. David himself speaks about lions and bears. Doesn't that prove he was simply a shepherd in isolation? But listen carefully to how he frames it. Your servant used to keep his father's sheep. Used to. That phrase carries temporal distance. He is not defining identity in the present moment of confrontation. He is presenting prior experience as evidence of capability. And then the narrative in 1 Samuel adds another layer. David moves between Saul's court and Bethlehem. That is not static life. That is movement between environments with completely different demands. One world is the wilderness outside Bethlehem. Open land, silence, isolation, the absence of structured human systems. The other world is the royal court. Political tension, music, hierarchy, and a king struggling with internal instability. Most people live inside one environment at a time. David is moving between both, and that dual exposure begins to shape something deeper in his character formation. Because when you read the Psalms later attributed to him, you hear both worlds speaking through the same voice. Silence and structure, isolation and authority, wilderness and court life. And that combination produces a psychological and spiritual texture that is difficult to reduce to a single category. Now return to the Valley of Elah. 40 days of silence from Israel's army. Goliath appears every morning and every evening. The pattern itself becomes psychological pressure. David arrives and begins asking questions. What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine? That is not passive curiosity. That is situational analysis inside a live conflict environment. Operational thinking begins to appear in his speech. His brother Eliab reacts with anger. But notice something important in the text. He does not challenge David's presence in the camp as something abnormal in itself. The tension is relational, not structural, because David is already functioning inside a system where his presence is not illegal or unexpected. He is not breaking into a world he does not belong to. He is already moving within overlapping roles. When Saul finally confronts him, the objection is simple. You are a na'ar, a classification statement, an attempt to reduce complexity into category. David does not respond with emotion, he responds with memory. Lion, bear, both killed. That is how readiness is communicated in a culture that values demonstrated capability over verbal assertion. Then comes the sling. And here is where modern imagination often collapses the detail into something small, a toy, a symbol, something childish. But ancient slingers were not casual throwers. They were trained specialists. Archaeological findings and historical accounts from multiple ancient cultures indicate that slinging required coordination, repetition, and accuracy developed over time. Some slingers could deliver projectiles at velocities capable of serious impact at distance. This was not improvisation. It was a weapons system in its own right, And it operated on a different tactical principle than close combat weapons. Goliath fights at close range, spears, javelins, sword. His advantage depends entirely on proximity. David never enters that zone. He maintains distance. And that decision alone reconfigures the entire encounter. When Goliath says, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" he is reacting to a breakdown in expected combat structure. He is encountering a different system of engagement than the one he trained for. David's confidence is not randomness. It is control of distance, timing, and method. After Goliath falls, David is not returned to obscurity. He enters sustained military integration. Campaigns begin, leadership roles expand. He moves into the architecture of the kingdom's military structure. Later, 2 Samuel describes the mighty men, elite warriors operating at the highest level of David's command structure. And David himself reflects on formation with language that is worth noticing. "Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war, my fingers for battle." That word "trains" matters. It implies process, development, repetition under guidance, not sudden accident. To be precise, the text never erases David's shepherd life. That detail remains present and true. But it is not the only layer the narrative gives weight to at the moment of Goliath. The language of valor, the armor-bearer role, the movement between court and field, all of it builds a more complex identity structure. Not contradiction, but layering. Not replacement, but depth. And that changes how the miracle is interpreted. If David is completely untrained, the miracle feels like pure divine inversion of expectation. But if David is already shaped by exposure to wilderness pressure, court dynamics, and service responsibility, then the miracle takes on a different texture. It becomes timing. It becomes placement. It becomes convergence of formation and moment. Both interpretations affirm divine involvement, but they are not identical narratives. And the Hebrew language leans toward complexity rather than simplification, especially in how nayar shifts depending on environment. 50 occurrences in 1 Samuel alone create a linguistic pattern that resists a single rigid definition. David was young. David was faithful. David trusted deeply. But he was also already formed in environments that demanded resilience. Silence shaped him. Service shaped him. Conflict shaped him. And those forces do not cancel each other out. They accumulate. This is not just a boy from the hills stepping into a battlefield by accident. This is a life already carrying layered experience, arriving at a precise moment in history. The stone still flies, the giant still falls, and the story still changes direction in that valley. But when you look closely at the language, something quieter emerges underneath the surface narrative. The miracle does not become smaller. It becomes more textured, more human in its unfolding, and still deeply dependent on timing beyond human control. And maybe that is the part most people miss when they rush through familiar stories without slowing down long enough to hear the words again.